Hey everyone, this is Arben. I'm the baker and owner here at Le French Dad in Montclair. We are going to go through making one of these guys. You should know it by now by name and the shape as well. This is a baguette, staple in French baking and also French consumers. And we'll go through the process and also a little bit of history as well. It's a fairly recent addition to the French baking world, the most popular nonetheless. We'll go from mixing our dough all the way through baking, as we've seen here, to the product. Today's task is going to be making these guys. Baguettes. There's no other name for it. Everybody knows what it is about. So we're going to go through the process and see how we go from a mixture of only 3 ingredients, really, water, flour, salt, to this big product. So the French baguette is a fairly recent addition to the French breads. Started off at the beginning of last century, really. People's habits have changed. We got more and more urbanized. Paris was developing at a fast pace. The traditional miche, or the traditional large breads that were baked by the bakers, gave place to bread that needed to be portable, light, and be able to be taken any time of the day. And that's where baguette really started off. So it could feed single individuals or young couples that were just starting off, instead of having a whole large family. In the beginning, baguettes were mainly used with sourdough starter and a pinch of yeast. So this is what we do here at the bakery as well. And there are many variations to it, obviously, throughout France itself, but also other parts of the world where they're trying to recreate the flavor and the shape as well. Typical shape is a stick. That's what literally means in French, a baguette. All right, so let's get to it now. So we're gonna have, we already scaled a few things ahead of time, our water, also our flour as well, and we're gonna take some portion of the sourdough starter to get it going. Okay, so in order to produce what we produce, we use a spiral mixer. At home, you can, if you have a KitchenAid or some kind of a mixer that you can run off of too, that's great. Otherwise, you can also start kneading, or making your dough by hand. We scaled flour, our water. Today we're gonna make about 80 baguettes or so. Total flour that we have here is about 14.5 kilos. So that's roughly 30 pounds or so. First step of the mixing is going to be mixing the flour and the water together, along with the sourdough starter. Okay, so our flour is here. I'm gonna get the water from the fridge. There goes our water. So since we're using a spiral mixer or a mixer, we need to have the water be colder than the ambient air. At home, since you're not going to have a lot of friction, a lot of heating up due to the mixing process, you can use room temperature water, right? Because you're not going to heat the dough overall. Okay, so here we got about 10 kilos of water. Okay, so it's important to also mention that all of the measurements, all of the scaling that we do are metric. Okay, so we talk about grams, kilograms, and not ounces and things like that, because we talk about volume. We have our spiral mixer. So first we're going to do is introduce put the water in. Okay, so we can see that we have a stainless steel bowl basically that's going to rotate, and a hook here. What really is the spiral hook that's going to allow us to mix the dough properly. Okay. And now we're going to introduce our sourdough starter. So for the sourdough starter, what we're going to do is we're going to scale it, and then we're going to refresh it, because we're going to need it for the next day, or we can use some to mix all of the other doughs that we have. So for the mixing part, we're going to tear it down to 0, okay, and then we're going to pour out 2,900 grams, or basically 2.9 kilos, or 20% of the flour weight into it. Okay. So the sourdough starter is just a mixture of water and flour that has fermented over time, okay? So it's nothing more or less than that. And this is what makes our bread, unique the ecosystem of the different lactic acid bacteria, as well as the wild yeast that you encounter on the cereal and the grains, makes it so that we have the flavor and the shapes, and also the overall aspect of the bread on its own. So now we're going to put our flour in. So we're going to put our flour through. Okay, you can see. All right, so we got all our flour out. Now what we're gonna do is literally start the mixing process, it's not actually the mixing process. It's a process that we call autolyse. So that process is gonna be about 5 minutes long or so, 5 or 6 minutes long. That's gonna allow us to amalgate or mix in all the flour and the water together, along with the sourdough starter. So that way we can start the fermentation process going, and we can also start creating our gluten protein network. And after that, we're gonna literally mix the dough by incorporating the salt, a pinch of yeast, and we're gonna also double hydrate the dough towards the end of the mix. Add a little bit of water to it so we can get it nice and smooth and flexible. We wait for about 5 minutes mixing time on low speed, so we can get all of the particles of flour incorporated into the water. And you can see that we'll go from this shaggy mass, let it rest for 20 minutes, start building its network, its gluten network, into a nice and smooth dough some 40 minutes or so later. So again, when you're mixing by hand, you want to make sure that you get all of your flour and water mixed in properly together, okay? And you would typically use either like a bench scraper, something like this, or a plastic one to get rid of the excess flour that you have on your hands. And you would let it rest for maybe 20 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on how warm or how cold your dough is, and put like a linen cloth or something that's going to prevent the dough from forming a crust. All right, so now that the autolyse or the resting period is over, which is about 20 to 30 minutes, we're going to add 2 ingredients to it. So this is going to be salt and fresh baker's yeast, okay? So I'm gonna toss that into the mixer. So the salt, typically I like to put it in the center. And you don't want to mix the salt and the yeast together, because it will have a negative impact on your dough. Okay, so putting the yeast on the other side. At home, what you can do, you can separate them and then just slowly incorporate it by hand. So we're gonna set our mixing time to 6 minutes in first speed and about 5 to 6 minutes in second speed. And we're gonna also use some water at our final step in order to get the dough a little bit more elastic and smoother to work with. And you can see that we have here the mixture of both the yeast and the salt going in, and it's going to slowly spread out and incorporate nice and easy into the dough. So the salt has a lot of influence into the dough. It gives us flavor, obviously, like salt does to any type of food or ingredients, but it also regulates fermentation. Too much salt, you'll not have a lot of fermentation, and too little salt, you're gonna ferment very quickly and not have maybe a dough that is suitable enough to be baked. The yeast that we use, in addition to what we've seen earlier, our sourdough starter, is something that we use on the baguettes only because it gives it that little extra push towards the end when it comes to fermentation. Back in the day, yeast wasn't very developed, or it wasn't accessible. A lot of bakers were still using sourdough only as a means of leavening the breads. We do a minimal amount of yeast because we want to develop the flavor. We're minimizing the mixing time and letting the dough rest overnight, so it can gain in flavor and texture. So that's it. We're gonna wait slowly for that first phase to finish in about 3 minutes, and then we'll run everything on second speed. Second speed, what happens is that a higher speed helps us incorporate a little bit more air into the dough, but not too much, because you don't want to oxidize the dough. So now towards the end of the mix, we're just gonna introduce what we call a pre-ferment, which is basically our a day or 2 day old baguette dough. This is going to help us, develop a little bit more flavor and the strength also, because it has already undergone a 24 or 48-hour fermentation process through. So the last step here is going to be introducing, the last bit of water, what we call bassinage. So it's a certain percentage of the final dough weight, flour weight, sorry. That's going to allow us to relax the dough and bring it back together, with a little bit more smoothness and elasticity. Okay, so now we're going to slowly show you the process. So I start off first with the middle. So we're going to trickle the water into the middle, wait for it to open up. And once it starts opening up, we're going to stop. Let it come back again a little bit, okay? So now you can see that the dough has, relaxed. And now we're gonna slowly trickle until all the way through the end of the mix. We're gonna help it, absorb slowly. We're gonna let the dough absorb the remaining water there is in the cup. You can see how we're, getting that nice sheen, and we're smoothing the dough out accordingly. Some bakers do this method, the bassinage, some don't. It really depends on your preference, and if you want to bother with it or not. But I think it's worthwhile doing it on our end at least. And then once we're done here, we're gonna scale and divide the dough into 7 kilograms a piece, so it can rest overnight and repeat the process all over again the next day. Our mixing part is done, so we ran through the course of the second speed. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna check the dough temperature-wise. I would advise you to have the dough anywhere between 24 to 26 degrees Celsius, which is ideal temperature in Fahrenheit would be around 78. That's when the yeast and the bacteria are at its most active. And also check in for your what we call a window pane, or your gluten development pane. So what you want to see is a nice flexible dough that can stretch, right? So this here, it's pure gluten at work, right? So you want to have a nice flexible membrane basically that shows you that, well, we did a decent job in mixing, and that we have a dough that is strong enough but not too strong and not too white. That means that it hasn't been oxidized. So we can keep all the flavors intact, right? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna scale the dough, put them into the bins. Each bin is going to be 7 kilos weight, and it's gonna go in the fridge for about 24 hours or so. And then, we repeat the cycle all over again. So let's get to it. All right, so now the next step, once we have finished our mixing, we're gonna put, like I said earlier, 7 kilos of dough into the bins. So these bins are gonna help us, maintain the dough, into an enclosed space. And we also put a little bit of oil, typically a neutral oil, like a canola or a sunflower oil. It doesn't alter the taste of the dough in itself, and it helps us with preventing the sticking, right? So make sure you have everything on the sides. If you do this at home, if you have it in a KitchenAid, I'd suggest you just keep the dough in the KitchenAid for the time of the primary bulk fermentation. Okay, so you scale, and then you make sure everything is at 0, and then you just take the dough out. So we got to make sure that we're at 7 kilos or so. We got a little bit too much off of it. All right. So you see that, although technically we have white flour, the dough has that creamy color to it, right? So that's what we want. And so now what we do is very simple. We're gonna take this dough, and we're just gonna do a simple fold to it, right? So we're just gonna pre-shape it of sorts, so it can just rest for about 20 minutes, okay? And then we're gonna do another fold, so we can gain some strength, and then just let it sit in in the refrigerator for, like I said, anywhere from 18 to 24 hours. So now that we have our all of our dough accounted for, so basically, you know, each bin is pretty much 20 baguettes, okay? So we have 20, 40, 60, 80 baguettes for tomorrow's production, right? And that's, you know, that's typically what we do on a daily basis here at the bakery. Now we're gonna do what we do basically when we start off our day. After we've set our croissants to proof, which takes about 2 to 3 hours, the second next thing we do is bring the baguette dough from upstairs, you know, in these bins, and we're gonna divide it. We're gonna use flour. We're gonna flour our first surface here, which we're gonna deposit the dough onto. We're gonna deposit also some flour on our scale. Okay, so I don't know if you can see here. The weight, and then we're going to put some flour here where we're going to put our scaled pieces of dough, what we call in French pâton. And the last step is going to be putting these onto a board for them to proof. So here we go with this guy. So you can see that, you know, here, you know, we have about 3.5 kilos of dough. Okay, so that basically makes up for 10 baguettes. Make sure it doesn't stick when we're going to flip it out. So we flip and we have a nice fermented dough. So you can see the you know, the effects of fermentation that goes through. So typically the baguette dough takes anywhere between 18 to 24 hours on our end to go, you know, to ferment. So from the mixing part that we've seen earlier, all the way to the baking part that you know, that we're gonna look into, you know, 3 hours from now. We basically have, you know, this nice piece of dough that has, you know, that has gain some strength, flavor. We're gonna cut into the dough. So we're gonna deposit our piece of dough and we're gonna look, you know, at the weight. Okay, so here we have about 370 grams. We're gonna cut a little bit through and we're gonna make it to 350. Okay. The reason we go through 350 is that, you know, when the dough is being baked, it loses anywhere from 15 to 20% of its total weight, right? Because water evaporates, right? So we want to make sure that, you know, we have enough weight to start with, and you know, we don't have a small baguette to go through basically. So, and it's also, you know, regulated in France. You know, bread is regulated, meaning that you know, a baguette has to be a certain weight. It can only contain X amount of salt, and there's also an appellation, what we call a baguette de tradition, which we're executing here on our end, which stipulates that, you know, the only ingredients that you that are allowed are basically flour, water, salt, and yeast, right? So no conditioners, no improvers, no any you know, magic powder that, you know, that some of the industrial guys use because they want to preserve the dough, you know, preserve the bread longer and keep it on the shelves, you know, by putting, you know, all sorts of additives and things like that. So that's not something that we do, that we don't believe in, and, you know, it alters the taste. This is what you would typically do at home, huh? You know, if you have to happen to make, like, let's say 1,200 or 1,300 grams of dough, you would scale a baguette, you know, this way, or you can make a half a baguette, or what we call a demi baguette, at home, so it can fit into your oven and also into your Dutch oven, your cast iron pot. Okay. So now we're gonna do what we call a pre-shape. So we're gonna gently put all our dough into a log, typically, so we can roll it out a little bit longer. So this is what it looks like. Okay, so this is what we call a seam, right? So the seam is going to go on the bottom, and it's going to basically seal up the dough and have it ready for us to final shape. Okay, so nice and gentle. You don't need to be you know, a brute about it. You gotta have swift motion, but also, you know, firm and you know, firm and gentle at the same time, because the dough, you know, you have to be able to get the right tension from the get-go, so you can final shape the dough the way you want it, right? So, you know, and also, you know, when in case of doubt, you can always use a little bit of flour to help you get rid of the stickiness of the dough itself. I remember in my humble beginnings, I was always having my hands dirty because, well, I didn't know how to handle dough. But you know, with time and practice, that comes along fairly well. So typically we would put 14 baguettes per board, and now it's going to be a waiting game, really. So we're going to go anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, depending on, you know, if it's hot in the lab or if it's you know, cold. We're going to extend the you know, the resting period to up to an hour and a half. But you know, right now we're at 26 degrees in this room right now, so we're gonna you know, take maybe an hour to get them rested, so the gluten network can relax and the dough can come to room temperature as well. Okay. Into our rack. So at home, you know, if you want to do this at home, you can always put a linen cloth or just like a rag over your dough so it doesn't crust. Basically, you gotta make sure that it's not exposed to to air and draft, because otherwise you're gonna have a crusty dough and you're gonna be able to shape it nicely. And that's it for now. So this is our intermediary step where, you know, after the mixing has been done, this is the next day affair where we previously have divided, scaled, and pre-shaped our dough, right? We give it an hour to an hour and a half rest, so the dough can, you know, relax and also get back to room temperature. So now we're gonna do what we call a final shaping, right? So this is where we're gonna, do a series of folds onto the dough, which ultimately is gonna become, you know, baguette in its shape as we know it. Okay. So this is the last step of shaping, basically, before we put it down to rest again on a speed rack for about an hour and a half, and send it back to the fridge. Okay, so very important, you're gonna dust your workbench. If you feel that your dough is a little bit sticky, you can always put an extra coating of flour on top of it, and then, you know, use a scraper bench that you can get, you know, through Amazon or whatnot, and just have it, you know, easier, or the workbench, basically the scraper is going to be an extension of your arm, right? So we're going to be nice and gentle, but you know, very swift as well. So we're going to stretch the dough out a little bit this way, and then we're going to do a series of folds, right? So you know, I like to do 3 folds. So 1 fold this way, then you can flip the dough around, fold it halfway back into it, and you can see that here we have almost our final shape done. So now we're just going to seal the edge on that end, and what we're going to do is we're going to slightly stretch it out without pushing too much onto the dough, and have our final shape done. So here we're gonna put it onto our linen cloth. The linen cloth, again, is the reason we use this is that it retains the shape of the dough itself, and allows the dough to breathe through the fermentation, right? I mean, it doesn't technically breathe, but, you know, it allows for moisture to be contained and have it nicely relaxed. And also it helps keeping things in shape as well. So that's why we put that crease on. So now we're going to go on to the next one. So we take our paton from the board, and we're going to do a series of folds, right? So we're going to use, depending on if you're a righty or lefty, we're going to use one hand to fold the dough, and the second hand to put a seal onto it. Okay, so we're going to do nice and gentle here. Okay, you can flip the dough around. Okay, and do the same thing again. So you pick up with your thumb and your other finger, and you're basically going to make a nice seam throughout, right? So here you're almost at the end of almost at final shape. Now we're just going to do a final crease or final fold in order to seal the baguette. Okay, so we go straight from here, and you can see some of the bubbles bursting up because, you know, that's the CO2 being popped. And now we're going to just slightly roll it out to the length we need. Okay, so next step is going to be finding that seam back again, so you can see that the seam has integrated perfectly, and we're going to put the dough seam side up. Okay, because we don't really care if the seam side of the dough gets a little bit crusty, as long as we have the bottom or the top side of the dough nice and moist, we're good, we're in business. So same thing here. So basically this process, we typically bake off anywhere from 80 to 100 baguettes on a daily basis. A little bit more on the weekends because we do farmers markets, things like that. And we always have specific requests, people coming in asking for bread for a party and whatnot. So we got to make sure we have enough to go through. So everything that we do is a manual. Of course here we're doing things in a slow motion, but typically it would take anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds to get a baguette into its final shape. So because what we need to do is be efficient and make sure that the fermentation that the dough doesn't overproof or over ferment in that sense and doesn't come out the way we want it basically. So, and again we make sure that we follow closely the fermentation process from start to end, from the mixing part that we've seen earlier all the way down to the baking part, which we'll see in about an hour and a half from now. So all right, so we're almost there. I'm just gonna gently stretch it out. The reason I'm not pushing also is because I don't want all the bubbles or the CO2 that has been forming through the fermentation to go out, right? So we don't have a flat piece of dough in the end. So we're just gonna make sure we're gentle, but we're also firm on that aspect, and we go through without a major hitch. Okay. So 2, 4, 6, and we typically put 7 baguettes per linen cloth. We need to have some space, but not too much space in between, so the dough can have enough room to relax, but we don't want it. We want it to keep its shape as well. That's why we're not allowing too many baguettes on one piece of cloth. Okay, and the cloth here that we use, you can also find it on Amazon if you're looking for it, and it can be useful for for the baguettes, but for other breads as well if you're pushing into it. Okay, so now we're gonna roll our second one. We have 3 baguettes left here, and one before last. So you can see that the dough has gained some strength by being back to room temperature. It has also relaxed, so that's why we're able to extend it without pushing too much onto it, and we retain the volume because we're not literally degassing the dough. But sometimes people have a tendency to do so, because in the end what we need is to have a nice volume and a nice bake throughout. All right, and that should do it for this step. All right, so now we're in the last process of the baguette making. Might be also the most critical step, which is baking. So we've seen how the dough is mixed, fermented overnight, and then taken out of the fridge, divided, scaled, pre-shaped, rested again, final shaped. Now it's back in the fridge for an hour and a half, so it can cool off a little bit, which will be easier to handle and easier to score as well. All right, so the dough has rested. It's nice and cold again. So we're gonna transfer it over to our boards, and we'll be able to bake it off. So once we have done the final shape on the dough, on the baguette dough, we're putting it back into the fridge for an hour and a half, so it can cool things off, get it relaxed again, and that will allow us to have a dough that's easier to handle and be able to transfer it onto the board without having to have 10,000 different manipulations. So we're gonna do basically we're gonna load 10 baguettes. Typically we would load anywhere between 14 to 15 baguettes at a time, just because we can. That's, depending on the size of the oven you're using, and the time that it's going to spend into the oven. So this step here, we add a little bit of flour just to give it a nice, more of a rustic look to it. And this is also a very critical part, which is scoring the dough. So the reason we score is because we need the dough to be able to develop and create weak points of access so it can expand properly, right? So each baker has his own technique, his way to score, and and in France we call that a signature. Just like having your own signature, each baker has its own. So here, there's many ways to run it. I typically, get my blade close to my fingertips, and with one hand I keep it straight, and with the other hand I just score all the way through. So we're gonna do 4 scores across, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna put an angle to the blade itself, and then do 4 scores across. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, just like dance lessons, right? So this board is gonna go under, and then we're gonna repeat the process again with the rest of the baguettes. So this is a linen cloth, right? So this allows us to rest the dough without with a crease, and to be able to have it nice and soft, not have any moisture left out from the dough itself. So this is widely used in baguette making. And resting basically. In French, we call it a couche, which literally means a layer. Most of the dough is rested on these, mainly baguettes. But we also have what we call a proofing basket or banneton, where we put larger loaves and things like that. So same thing. We're gonna run our dough, 4 slashes across, and it allows us to basically have the dough nicely open and whatnot. So this is our deck oven. The main difference between a conventional oven and this guy is that we have steam injection. Okay, so basically hot water comes through, and during the first step of the process, that hot water or pellicle goes over the dough and keeps it moist in order for it to be able to expand, right? So if we didn't have that, the dough would crust almost immediately and wouldn't be able to expand. So that first step, where we're going to inject steam, basically hot steam, is going to allow us to develop the dough, with that pellicle of moisture in. The way to do this at home is to bake bread in a closed container. Typically a Dutch oven would do that, because during that first step of baking, water is gonna basically evaporate, and if it is sealed in a Dutch oven, for instance, the water droplets or the steam is gonna go back onto the dough, deposit itself, and it's gonna automatically create that fine pellicle of moisture. So it will allow it to rise. And then the second step, which we'll see also here, is going to be opening the back dampers. So we can have that moisture come out through the vents and basically finish forming the crust. Okay, so same thing at home. The first step, have an enclosed Dutch oven container or oven pot brought in, and then the second step, you're going to take that lid off and basically be able to finish baking it off. So for the baguettes, typically the oven has to be very hot. Here we're putting it at 275 degrees Celsius, which is well above 500 degrees Fahrenheit, because baguettes are long, they're thin, and they don't bake for that long. So we need to make sure that we have a lot of steam and a lot of heat coming in, so they can pick up and rise fast. Okay, so now we're going to go through the process, and we're going to load our 10 baguettes in. Okay. The last one goes in. Okay. You good? All right. Now we're gonna hear that steam coming through, okay? All right. And we're gonna drop the temperature to 245 degrees Celsius. And we're gonna bake it for about 18 minutes, okay? So that first step, you see that, you've heard that hiss going through, right? So that's basically the hot water or steam coming through and depositing itself onto the baguette surface. And now we wait 18 minutes until it, goes, up, and we'll let that second step in when we open the dampers and let the steam escape. We put a timer for that first phase of depositing the hot steam on the dough surface, letting it go fully enclosed for like 18 to 20 minutes, depending on how much bread you put in. So now that we have completed that first step, you can see that we started. You see the steam, the steam coming up. What we're gonna do is we're gonna open. There are vents in the back of the oven that we open up either manually or through an electro valve. That basically is gonna allow us to get the dough dried off. Okay, so you see some browning that has already started occurring. So we're gonna close the. We're gonna close the oven now, and we're gonna let it sit for about anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes. Again, it all depends on the thermal mass going in, so we can finish off the baking. So we're gonna with the vents open, we're gonna be able to dry the excess moisture from that initial step, and to have a nice brown crust on the bread. And that's it. So this is our last step here. We've run through the drying the dough, drying the baguette part. Now we're going to take it out of the oven, clean the oven, and get back to it after. So you have a few of these guys up here. So we got a nice crust going on. We got a nice coloration, decent size. What we're looking for is to have a nice brown color. We have also some gold going through, but you can see, the fact that we put a little bit of flour kind of gives a good contrast to the overall dough, and they're pretty decent, I gotta say. So we're gonna unload all of these guys now. Same thing with these. So now, even though we finished baking the baguette, they're still gonna continue to bake, right, internally, right? So it's gonna do what we call in French re-sweating. So it's gonna keep getting the water out until it basically cools off, right? So and depending on the time of the year, or if you have a lot of humidity, you would have to basically extend the drying time off. So the hot or the humidity doesn't seep back in, right? So and that's something that you can't always control, unfortunately, especially in our type of setup, because we don't have air conditioned perfect set temperature all the time. Same with downstairs. So you got to really be paying attention to what your dough does and how it behaves through the course of its fermentation and obviously baking process. So people like to have that notion, or to think that eating hot bread is the best thing ever. I'm not on that train, because we need to have the dough, or the bread has to the baked dough, the bread has to be set in terms of heat. It has to cool off completely, and that's where all the flavors come through, right? So if you were to eat a baguette that's like right out of the oven hot, all you would taste is basically still the alcohol emanating through, basically. So that's why you have a little bit of a more sour taste to it, and it kind of hits you, because just alcohol is basically the byprocess of fermentation, right? Alcohol and carbon dioxide. So we have a lot of people asking us to reheat the baguette, and they eat them on the spot, which I don't necessarily agree with, because, like I said, once the baguette or any type of bread has cooled off and properly baked, it can reveal over 200 different compounds of flavor, right? So which you won't get when you taste like hot bread. So make sure that your dough has cooled off, or your bread has cooled off completely, and then you can enjoy it. So this is 24 hours later, and this is the reward that we bakers get every day. I'm Arben from the French Dad. Come by the bakery to enjoy some authentic French breads and French coffee. Bon appétit.